I'm Madison Lawrence, 32, and I've spent every Christmas for the past decade feeling like an afterthought in my own family. This year was supposed to be different. I'd finally built something incredible, something that would make them see me. But as I sat at the gleaming dining table watching everyone unwrap lavish gifts while my place setting remained conspicuously empty, I realized some patterns never change. Little did they know, I wasn't just Madison the overlooked middle child anymore. I had an empire now. Are you watching from somewhere cozy? If so, hit that like button and subscribe while I tell you how I finally turned the tables. Growing up as the middle child between two high-achieving siblings was like living in permanent shadow. My older brother Tyler, now 36, was always the golden child. He breezed through school with perfect grades, charmed every teacher, and eventually graduated from Harvard Medical School. Now he's a respected cardiologist with a picture-perfect wife, two adorable children, and a house in the most exclusive neighborhood in Boston. Every conversation about Tyler included words like brilliant and exceptional. My parents practically glowed whenever they spoke about him. Then there's my younger sister Rebecca, 28, who inherited every beautiful gene in our family pool. By 16, she was already modeling for local boutiques. By 20, she had signed with a major agency in New York. Now her face graces magazine covers and billboards across the country. She's beautiful, charismatic, and everyone is naturally drawn to her. My mother keeps a scrapbook of every advertisement and feature Rebecca appears in, proudly showing it to anyone who visits. And then there's me, Madison, perpetually caught in the middle. Not brilliant enough to compete with Tyler. Not beautiful enough to compete with Rebecca. Just average. At least that's how my family made me feel. My solid B-plus grades were met with Tyler had strayed as, and my sensible career choices with Rebecca knew exactly what she wanted at your age. Every accomplishment I achieved somehow became diminished when filtered through the lens of my siblings' successes. Our family Christmas gatherings always highlighted this dynamic perfectly. The Lawrence family Christmas tradition involved extravagant gift exchanges that felt more like a performance than a celebration of giving. My parents, Janet and William, spared no expense for these displays of affection, except when it came to me. I still remember the Christmas when I was 16. Tyler received a brand new car with a giant red bow in the driveway. Rebecca got a trip to Paris for a cultural experience before college. I received a gift card to a bookstore and a generic sweater. When I tried to hide my disappointment, my mother said, "Madison, don't be ungrateful. Not everyone needs something flashy." This pattern continued year after year. One Christmas, Tyler got an expensive watch that befitted a future doctor, while Rebecca received designer clothes for her budding career. I received bath products from the mall. Another year, my parents gifted Tyler with a down payment for his first house, and Rebecca with connections to a major modeling agency. I got kitchen appliances because you're so practical, Madison. When I tried to address the disparity, I was told I was being too sensitive or making everything a competition. My feelings were consistently invalidated until I started to believe that perhaps I really was overreacting. Maybe I didn't deserve the same level of thoughtfulness or investment. This belief burrowed deep inside me, shaping how I viewed myself and my place in the family. The turning point came during my junior year at my parents' alma mater, where I'd been pressured to attend despite wanting to study elsewhere. I was miserable, pursuing a business degree I had no passion for, trying to meet expectations that felt impossible. After a particularly harsh phone call with my father about my disappointing grades, I made a decision that scandalized my family. I dropped out. The fallout was exactly as dramatic as I'd expected. My father refused to speak to me for weeks. My mother cried about throwing away opportunities. Tyler lectured me about responsibility, and Rebecca simply couldn't understand why anyone would walk away from a sure thing. None of them bothered to ask what I wanted. With the remnants of my college fund, which was notably smaller than what my siblings had received, I moved across the country to Seattle. I needed distance, physical and emotional, to figure out who I was beyond the constraints of being the middle Lawrence child. For years after that, Our relationship consisted of obligatory holiday visits and occasional phone calls filled with subtle digs about my life choices. "How's that internet thing going?" my father would ask dismissively. "Still playing with websites." Or my mother's concerned, "Don't you think it's time to find something more stable, dear?" Even my siblings got in on it. Tyler would offer to talk to some people about real jobs, while Rebecca suggested I could at least try modeling for commercial work. They need average-looking people too. What they didn't know, what I deliberately kept from them, was that the internet thing was becoming remarkably successful. It started small, with an e-commerce site I built from scratch, selling customized planners for entrepreneurs. I taught myself coding late into the night, studied business strategies during lunch breaks from my day job, and reinvested every penny of profit. While my family assumed I was barely scraping by, I was secretly expanding into multiple digital enterprises, a subscription service for business tools, an online education platform, and eventually a suite of productivity apps that caught the attention of major investors. Each success I kept private, partly because I knew they wouldn't understand or validate it, but mostly because I was still seeking their approval on their terms rather than my own. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very skills my family dismissed, my creativity, my adaptability, my understanding of the digital landscape, were precisely what led to my success. While they were looking backward at traditional paths, I was building something for the future. But old habits die hard, and every Christmas I would return home, hoping that somehow this year would be different. This year they would see me. This December marked 5 years since I'd launched my company, and 10 years since I'd left college. As the holiday approached, I seriously considered skipping the annual Lawrence family Christmas for the first time. My assistant had already researched luxury resorts in Bali where I could spend a peaceful week instead of subjecting myself to the familiar pattern of disappointment. "You could just send gifts and call it a day," Natalie suggested as she placed the glossy brochures on my desk. "No one would blame you." I traced my finger over the image of an infinity pool overlooking the ocean. The escape was tempting. After all, I'd built a life where I could go anywhere, do anything. Why choose discomfort? But something in me needed closure. Perhaps it was the milestone my business had just reached, or maybe it was simply time to stop hoping for validation I might never receive. Whatever the reason, I found myself replying, "Book the flights home instead. But keep Bali as a backup." The truth was, despite everything, I still harbored a small, stubborn hope that this Christmas might be different. My company, Nexus Platforms, had just acquired our largest competitor in a move that sent ripples through the tech industry. The acquisition had been featured in Forbes, with my portrait gracing a 2-page spread under the headline, "The Quiet Revolutionary: How Madison Lawrence Built a Digital Empire." The company valuation had officially hit 9 figures, and industry insiders were calling me a visionary. For the first time, I had tangible, undeniable proof of my success, the kind that even my status-conscious family couldn't dismiss. Maybe now they would finally see me, not as the disappointed middle child, but as the woman who had created something significant on her own terms. I prepared modestly wrapped gifts for everyone. A first edition book my father had mentioned wanting years ago, a vintage brooch for my mother that matched her favorite earrings, a donation to a medical research foundation in Tyler's name, and a weekend spa retreat for Rebecca. I didn't choose these gifts to impress, but to show that despite everything, I'd been listening to them all these years. The journey home to the Connecticut suburb where I grew up felt like traveling back in time. As the Uber pulled up to my parents' colonial-style mansion, decorated with perfectly symmetrical wreaths and twinkling white lights, I took a deep breath. The house looked exactly the same, a monument to tradition and stability that my parents valued above all else. My mother answered the door, her face registering polite surprise as if she hadn't been the one to confirm my arrival time. "Madison, you're here." She offered a brief hug that smelled of Chanel No. 5 and stepped back to assess me. "You look professional." "That's nice." Inside, the house was bustling with activity. Tyler and his wife Amanda were arranging presents under the 12-foot Christmas tree while their children, Emma and Ethan, played with electronic toys that were far too expensive for their ages. Rebecca was lounging gracefully on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, and occasionally showing something to our father, who laughed appreciatively. "Look who's here," my mother announced without much enthusiasm. Madison made it, after all. Tyler glanced up. "Hey, Maddie. Good to see you could fit us into your schedule." The nickname I'd always hated, the subtle dig about my absence. Rebecca barely looked up from her phone. "Nice sweater. Is that new?" It wasn't. I'd worn it last Christmas too. My father finally noticed my presence.
Madison.
Hope the trip wasn't too difficult. He immediately returned to whatever Rebecca was showing him. I placed my gifts under the tree and offered to help with dinner preparations, but my mother waved me off. "Amanda and I have a system. Too many cooks and all that. Why don't you just relax?" So I sat on the periphery of my family's activities, watching as they moved in their familiar choreography that somehow always excluded me. Tyler regaled everyone with stories from the hospital, while Rebecca shared gossip about celebrities she'd met on photo shoots. When I attempted to mention my company's recent growth, my father interrupted to ask Tyler about his thoughts on the stock market. Later that evening, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. Standing in the hallway outside the kitchen, I froze as my mother's voice drifted through the partially open door. "Did you finalize the gift for Rebecca?" she asked my father. "All arranged. The condo will be ready by New Year's. She'll be thrilled." And Tyler's investment account. Set up. A nice start for Emma and Ethan's college funds. There was a pause before my mother added, "Should we have gotten something for Madison? She did come all this way." My father's response was dismissive. "What would we get her? She doesn't need anything practical, and she's never appreciated the things we've chosen before. Besides, we didn't expect her to come. I suppose you're right. She seems to be doing fine on her own anyway." I quietly retreated to the guest room, the familiar ache of exclusion settling in my chest. Nothing had changed. Even now, they couldn't see past their perceptions of who I was, or rather, who I wasn't. That night, I lay awake debating whether to confront them or simply endure another Christmas of being an afterthought. Part of me wanted to leave immediately, to abandon this futile hope for recognition. But another part, the businesswoman who had learned to see challenges as opportunities, thought perhaps there was a different approach. I decided to wait and see how Christmas Day unfolded. If the pattern continued, maybe it was time for them to see exactly what their overlooked middle child had become. Christmas morning in the Lawrence household had always been a carefully orchestrated event, and this year was no exception. I awoke to the sounds of holiday music drifting up from the grand piano in the living room, where my father was playing carols while my mother supervised the household staff in arranging a breakfast buffet. The aroma of cinnamon rolls, bacon, and freshly brewed coffee filled the air. By the time I made my way downstairs, everyone else was already gathered in the living room. Tyler's children were playing with new toys that had clearly been opened earlier, while the adults sipped mimosas and chatted animatedly. "There she is," my mother said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We didn't want to wake you. You must have been exhausted from your trip." The truth was, no one had bothered to tell me that the family was gathering early. It was a small exclusion, but a familiar one. The house was decorated impeccably, as always. Fresh garlands draped across every doorway, hand-blown glass ornaments adorned the massive tree, and holiday-themed artwork had replaced the usual paintings. It was a showcase of holiday perfection that my mother had likely spent weeks planning. "Madison, would you mind helping in the kitchen?" my mother asked, though Tyler's wife Amanda was already tied with an apron and assisting. "Rebecca needs to preserve her hands for a shoot next week, and Tyler's entertaining the children." In the kitchen, I was assigned the task of peeling potatoes while Amanda and my mother worked on more complex dishes, discussing a charity gala they had both attended. When I attempted to join the conversation, the topic suddenly shifted to Amanda's interior designer, someone I naturally wouldn't know. After an hour of preparation, we gathered for the traditional Lawrence family Christmas photo by the tree. I was positioned at the edge of the group, easily croppable if desired. Then it was time for the elaborate dinner my mother had been planning for months. The dining table stretched the length of the room, covered in Irish linen and set with the Wedgwood china reserved for special occasions. Place cards in elegant calligraphy directed everyone to their seats. Mine was at the far end, beside my young niece and nephew, while my parents, Tyler, and Rebecca occupied the center of the table where conversation would naturally flow. As the first course was served, a butternut squash soup with truffle oil, my father raised his glass. A toast to family and another blessed year. Tyler, congratulations on your department's new research grant. Rebecca, your Vogue cover was spectacular. To continued success. Glasses clinked around the table. Mine remained untouched as I waited for some acknowledgement of my presence, but none came. Throughout dinner, the conversation revolved around my siblings' accomplishments and plans. Tyler discussed the medical conference he was keynoting in Switzerland. Rebecca shared details about her upcoming campaign with a luxury fashion brand. My parents beamed with pride, asking follow-up questions and offering enthusiastic support. When I mentioned my company's recent acquisition, my mother nodded distractedly before turning to Rebecca. Tell everyone about that director you met at the charity gala, darling. By the time dessert was served, individual yulog cakes decorated with spun sugar, I had fallen silent. Years of this treatment had taught me that struggling for attention only made the exclusion more painful. Instead, I focused on helping my niece cut her dessert, finding small comfort in her innocent chatter about Santa Claus. After dinner came the main event, the Lawrence family gift exchange. This tradition had always been my father's domain. He would stand by the tree, selecting gifts one by one, making a small speech about each recipient before they opened their present. It was theatrical and excessive, but it was our tradition. First, my father announced, reaching for an envelope tied with gold ribbon, for Tyler and his beautiful family. Tyler accepted the envelope, opening it to reveal documents for an investment account. We've established a college fund for Emma and Ethan, my father explained. $100,000 to start, with annual contributions to follow. Tyler embraced our parents while Amanda thanked them profusely. This is incredibly generous, she said. The children are so blessed to have you as grandparents. Next came Rebecca's gift, a set of keys in a small velvet box. For our rising star, my father said proudly, a pied a terre in Manhattan. We know the commute from Connecticut has been tiring, and you deserve a beautiful space in the city. Rebecca squealed with delight, jumping up to hug both parents. It's exactly what I wanted. You guys are the absolute best. One by one, other family members received their gifts. A luxury cruise for my aunt and uncle, a sports car for my cousin who had just graduated college. Even the household staff received generous envelopes that made them smile appreciatively. I sat patiently, waiting for my name to be called. As the pile of presents dwindled, a familiar knot formed in my stomach. Still, I maintained my composure, smiling politely as others exclaimed over their gifts. Finally, the last present was distributed, a set of golf clubs for my father's brother, and my father stepped back, clapping his hands together with finality. Well, that's everything. Shall we move to the living room for coffee? A heavy silence fell over the room as everyone realized what had just happened. I had been completely skipped. No gift, no acknowledgement, not even a token present to maintain appearances. My mother was the first to notice, her eyes widening slightly. William, she said quietly to my father, didn't we have something for Madison? My father looked momentarily confused, then embarrassed. Oh, yes, well. He fumbled, clearly unprepared. Madison, your gift seems to have been delayed in shipping. These supply chain issues, We'll have it sent to your apartment when it arrives. It was a transparent lie. We all knew it. Rebecca at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, while Tyler studied his water glass with sudden interest. The extended family shifted awkwardly in their seats. In previous years, I might have nodded and accepted this excuse, swallowing my hurt to maintain the facade of family harmony. I might have volunteered to help clear the dishes, making myself useful to distract from the humiliation. But this year was different. This year, I had finally built something I was proud of, something that had value in the world beyond this dining room and its complicated dynamics. This year, I didn't need their validation, but perhaps they needed to understand the consequence of their actions. I set down my napkin carefully and smiled. That's all right. Actually, I have something I'd like to share with all of you. The room fell silent as I excused myself from the table. I could feel their eyes following me, probably expecting me to retreat to the guest room in hurt and disappointment as I had done so many times before. Instead, I walked calmly to the entryway where my suitcase stood, unzipped the front pocket, and removed a glossy magazine and a slim portfolio. When I returned to the dining room, my family was engaged in awkward small talk, clearly trying to move past the uncomfortable moment. My father was pouring more wine, my mother was fussing with dessert plates, and my siblings were checking their phones, typical avoidance behavior in the Lawrence household. I cleared my throat as I stood at the head of the table, the position my father usually occupied. All eyes turned to me with varying degrees of curiosity and apprehension. I thought this might be a good time to share some news, I said, keeping my voice steady. I placed the magazine on the table and slid it toward the center, where everyone could see it. The latest issue of Forbes, with my portrait prominently featured on the cover. "What's this?" my father asked, reaching for the magazine. "That," I replied, "is the December issue of Forbes, featuring a story about how I built my company from nothing to a 9-figure valuation in 5 years." A collective intake of breath rippled through the room. Tyler picked up the magazine, his eyebrows rising as he flipped to the feature article. "Nexus Platforms, this is your company?"
Yes.
"The company I started after dropping out of college, the decision you all criticized so vehemently. The internet thing Dad always dismissed. The hobby mom suggested I should set aside for a real career." I opened the portfolio and laid out the documents one by one: financial statements, acquisition papers, property deeds. "Last month, we acquired our largest competitor in a deal worth $87 million. Our user base has grown to over 15 million worldwide. We employ 300 people across 4 offices." I paused, allowing the information to sink in. "And yes, I own 62% of the company." My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her wine glass. "Madison, why didn't you tell us?" "I've tried to tell you. For years, I've tried to share my work with you, but you've never been interested. Every time I mentioned my business, the subject was changed. Every accomplishment was met with indifference. I met each of their gazes directly. Why would I keep trying to share something that clearly had no value to you?" Rebecca stared at the magazine, her perfectly manicured finger tracing my name in the headline. "This says you're worth over $100 million, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. $118 million as of last month's valuation," I confirmed. "More than everyone in this room combined, I believe." My father's face had gone through a remarkable transformation, from confusion to disbelief to a calculated interest I recognized from his business dealings. "Madison, this is extraordinary. You should have told us. We could have helped advised you. Could you have?" I interrupted gently. "You've never understood the digital economy, Dad. You've made that abundantly clear every time you've called it a fad or a bubble about to burst." I turned to address the entire table. I didn't share this to boast or to make anyone uncomfortable. But after years of being overlooked and undervalued in this family, after sitting through another Christmas where I'm literally the only person who didn't receive a gift, not even a token one, I thought it was time for some honesty. The silence that followed was profound. My Aunt Julia was the first to speak. "Madison, we had no idea. Your parents always said you were finding yourself or trying different things." "Because that was easier than admitting they didn't understand or approve of my choices," I replied. "It was easier than acknowledging that the middle child didn't fit their narrative of success." My mother's face had flushed a deep red. "That's not fair, Madison. We've always supported you, have you?" I asked quietly. "When was the last time you asked about my work with genuine interest? When have you ever celebrated my accomplishments the way you celebrate Tyler's or Rebecca's? When have you ever made me feel as valued as my siblings?" The discomfort around the table was palpable. Tyler shifted in his seat, looking troubled. Maddie, come on. No one meant to make you feel less important. Intent and impact are different things, Tyler. And it's Madison, not Maddie. I've asked you not to call me that since we were teenagers. The simple assertion of this boundary, something I would never have done in the past, seemed to surprise him into silence. Rebecca, always quick to adapt to changing social dynamics, was the first to attempt to align herself with my newfound status. This is amazing, Madison. I always knew you were smart. Do you need models for any of your advertising? I could introduce you to my agency. The transparent attempt to benefit from my success might have hurt once. Now, it's simply confirmed what I'd always suspected about our relationship. Thank you, but we work with a wonderful agency in Seattle that specializes in tech. I smiled politely. They prioritize diversity and authentic representation in their campaigns. My father had regained his composure, shifting into the business persona I recognized from watching him navigate challenges in his own career. Madison, we should talk about your future plans. Have you considered taking the company public? I know several investment bankers who... Dad, I interrupted gently. My company has one of the top IPO specialists in the country on retainer. We're planning our strategy carefully. The look of surprise on his face might have been comical in another context. He wasn't used to being refused, especially not by me. Extended family members who had never shown much interest in my life were suddenly watching me with newfound respect. My cousin Sarah, who had barely spoken 2 words to me earlier, was now eyeing me with blatant curiosity. So you live in Seattle now? In like a mansion or something? I have a penthouse downtown and a cabin on Lake Washington, I replied simply. But I travel frequently. As the initial shock wore off, the dynamics in the room began to shift perceptibly. Family members who had been clustered around Tyler and Rebecca earlier were now finding reasons to approach me. Conversations that had excluded me now paused with expectant looks, inviting my input. It was exactly what I had once desperately wanted, to be seen, to be included, to be valued. Yet now that it was happening, I recognized it for what it was, interest predicated on what I could offer rather than who I was. My mother, ever the gracious hostess even in uncomfortable situations, attempted to regain control of the evening. Well, this is wonderful news to celebrate. William, perhaps we should open that special bottle of champagne we've been saving. That won't be necessary, I said, gathering my documents. I'm not staying. What do you mean? My father asked, genuinely surprised. It's Christmas. Where would you go? I've booked a suite at the Four Seasons in the city. My driver is waiting. But it's family time, my mother protested, a note of panic in her voice. The perfect family Christmas was unraveling, and she didn't know how to stop it. Yes, I agreed quietly. It is family time. And for years, I've sat through these gatherings feeling like an outsider. Today made it abundantly clear that nothing has changed. The only difference is that now I value myself enough to walk away from situations that diminish me. I tucked the magazine and documents back into my portfolio and looked around the table. I wish you all a Merry Christmas. The gifts I brought are under the tree. I hope you enjoy them. As I turned to leave, Tyler stood up abruptly. Madison, wait. You can't just drop this bomb and walk out. I paused. I'm not dropping a bomb, Tyler. I'm simply sharing the truth about my life, something I would have done years ago if anyone had been interested in listening. With that, I walked out of the dining room, through the lavishly decorated foyer, and out the front door into the cold December night where my driver was indeed waiting, right on schedule. The drive to the Four Seasons was quiet. Snow had begun to fall, dusting the Connecticut landscape in a soft white blanket that made everything look pristine and peaceful, a stark contrast to the emotional turbulence I'd just left behind. I checked into my suite, a spacious corner room with panoramic views of the city skyline. After changing into comfortable clothes, I ordered room service and settled onto the plush sofa, finally allowing myself to process what had just happened. My phone had been buzzing incessantly since I left the house. I had expected as much. Glancing at the screen, I saw a parade of notifications, 6 missed calls from my mother, 4 from my father, 3 from Tyler, and a series of texts from Rebecca. There were also messages from extended family members who rarely contacted me, suddenly very interested in reconnecting. I wasn't ready to engage with any of them yet. Instead, I called Natalie, my assistant and friend. "How did it go?" She asked immediately. "Exactly as you predicted," I replied, unable to suppress a small laugh at the absurdity of it all. "They didn't have a gift for me, not even a token one. So you showed them the magazine? And the portfolio? You should have seen their faces." Natalie was silent for a moment. Was it satisfying? Getting to finally show them who you've become? I considered the question carefully. It wasn't about satisfaction. It was about finally standing in my truth without apology. For the first time, I didn't shrink myself to fit their expectations. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. "What happens now?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But whatever it is, it will be on my terms." After we hung up, I decided to look at my messages. My mother's texts were a mixture of apologies and justifications. "We had no idea you were doing so well," and "You should have told us," and "Please come back. We can fix this." My father was more direct. "We need to talk about your business. I have connections that could help you." Tyler's messages were unexpectedly reflective. "I never realized how we were making you feel. Can we talk?" Rebecca's approach was predictably self-centered. "OMG, Maddie, this is insane. We have so much to catch up on. Also, do you need a spokesperson for your brand? I have availability next quarter." The rest were variations on a theme. Sudden interest in my life, thinly veiled inquiries about potential opportunities, and invitations to connect. The transparency was almost refreshing after years of subtle dismissal. A knock at the door announced the arrival of room service. As I enjoyed my meal in peaceful solitude, I reflected on how different this Christmas was from what I had expected. I had come home hoping for recognition, perhaps even reconciliation. Instead, I had found clarity and, surprisingly, a sense of liberation. My phone rang again, my father. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Madison," he began, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he used in business negotiations, "this behavior is unacceptable. You've upset your mother and ruined Christmas dinner." "Some things never changed. Hello to you too, Dad. Don't be flippant. You can't just drop a bombshell like that and walk out. It's childish and unprofessional." I took a deep breath. "Is that really what you called to say? Because if so, this conversation is over." The silence on the other end suggested my response had surprised him. I had never spoken to him this way before. "Look," he finally said, his tone shifting to one I recognized from when he was trying to close a deal. "I think we got off on the wrong foot here. Your success is impressive, and frankly, I'm proud of what you've accomplished. But you have to understand how it appears when you've kept this hidden from us." "I didn't keep it hidden, Dad. I tried to share it with you many times. You weren't interested." "That's not true," he protested, though without conviction. "Last Thanksgiving, I mentioned that my company had secured major funding. You changed the subject to Tyler's new boat. 2 Christmases ago, I tried to tell Mom about opening our second office, and she asked Rebecca to show everyone her new magazine spread instead." The silence stretched between us. "The truth is," I continued, "my success doesn't fit the narrative you've created about me. It's easier for you to see me as the disappointment, the one who couldn't measure up, than to acknowledge that you might have been wrong about my choices." "That's unfair, Madison." "Is it? Then explain to me why, after 32 years, I'm still the only one who doesn't receive a meaningful gift at Christmas. Explain why my accomplishments are consistently ignored while Tyler and Rebecca are celebrated for every minor achievement." When he spoke again, his voice had lost its edge. "We didn't know about the magazine, about your company's value. And that's exactly the problem. My worth to this family has always been contingent on external validation. If Forbes says I'm successful, suddenly I matter. But all the years of hard work before that, the courage it took to follow my own path, none of that was valuable to you." There was another long pause. Your mother wants you to come back, he finally said. We're having brunch tomorrow. The whole family will be there. I don't think that's a good idea. I need some space. Madison, he said, and I heard a note of genuine confusion in his voice. What do you want from us? It was a question I hadn't expected, and it made me realize that despite everything, my father truly didn't understand the issue. I don't want anything from you, Dad. That's the point. For years, I wanted your approval, your recognition. I wanted to be valued the same way you value Tyler and Rebecca. But I don't need that anymore. I've built a life that fulfills me, with people who see and appreciate me for who I actually am. After we hung up, I received a text from my mother asking if she could visit me at the hotel tomorrow. I agreed to meet her for coffee in the lobby. Whatever happened next, I knew things between us would never be the same, and that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Later that evening, as I sat by the window watching the snow fall over the city, I realized that the hollow feeling I'd carried for so many Christmases had been replaced by something else. Not happiness exactly, but a quiet sense of peace. I had finally stopped waiting for my family to see my worth and had fully embraced it myself. My phone chimed with another message. This one was from Tyler, asking if we could talk, really talk, when things had calmed down. I think I owe you an apology, he wrote. Several, actually. It was the first genuine communication I'd had with my brother in years. I'd like that, I replied. As I prepared for bed, I thought about how strange it was that my family's failure to give me a gift had ultimately given me something far more valuable, the courage to finally stand in my truth. The days following Christmas unfolded in ways I couldn't have predicted. News of my success spread through the extended family like wildfire. Suddenly, relatives who had barely acknowledged my existence at previous gatherings were reaching out with congratulatory messages and invitations to lunch. My cousin Allison, who had always been closer to Rebecca, posted a throwback photo of us as children with the caption, "So proud of my brilliant cousin Madison and all she's accomplished." Hashtag family pride, hashtag girl boss, despite the fact that we hadn't had a real conversation in over a decade. My uncle David, my father's brother and business partner, called to discuss potential synergies between my company and their investment firm. When I politely declined, citing our different market approaches, he seemed genuinely surprised. The idea that I might not want or need their business connections had never occurred to him. Most telling were the emails from distant relatives and family friends asking if I might have opportunities for their children or grandchildren. Sarah is graduating from business school this spring and would love to learn from someone as successful as you, wrote my mother's cousin, whom I'd met perhaps 3 times in my life. I set firm boundaries with these opportunistic outreaches, responding with polite but non-committal messages. For more sincere inquiries, I offered to connect people with our HR department through proper channels, the same opportunity available to any qualified candidate. The morning after Christmas, I met my mother in the hotel lobby as promised. She looked smaller somehow, her usual confident posture diminished. She had dressed carefully, as always, but her eyes betrayed a sleepless night. "Madison," she began after we were seated with our coffees. "I don't know where to start." "How about with the truth?" I suggested gently. She twisted the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist, a gift from my father on their anniversary. "I never meant to make you feel less important than your siblings. You have to believe that." "I believe you didn't intend to hurt me," I acknowledged. "But the impact was the same, regardless of intent." "You were always so different," she continued. "Tyler and Rebecca were easy to understand. Their paths were clear from the beginning. But you always marched to your own drummer. I never knew how to connect with you. Did you try?" I asked. "Did you ever try to understand what mattered to me, rather than pushing me to fit a mold I wasn't meant for?" The question hung between us as she stared into her coffee cup. "I thought I was protecting you," she finally said. "The world rewards certain kinds of success. I wanted that for you. And when I found success on my own terms, where was the celebration then?" A tear slipped down her cheek. I didn't understand it. I didn't recognize it as success because it didn't look like what I thought success should be. She looked up at me. "That was my failure, not yours. It was perhaps the most honest conversation we'd ever had. For the first time, my mother was seeing me, really seeing me, not as a disappointing reflection of her expectations, but as the woman I'd become. "I can't change the past," she said, "but I'd like to understand your present. Your life. If you'd let me." It wasn't an immediate fix for years of emotional distance, but it was a beginning. My conversation with Tyler happened 2 days later, over lunch at a quiet restaurant away from family interference. Unlike our mother, Tyler didn't attempt to justify or explain away his behavior. "I've been a terrible brother," he said straightforwardly. "And I didn't even realize it until yesterday when Amanda pointed out how I've treated you all these years." I raised an eyebrow. "Amanda said that?" He nodded. "She was furious about what happened at Christmas dinner. Said she'd been uncomfortable with how the family treats you for years, but didn't feel it was her place to say anything." He grimaced. "She also pointed out that I've been competing with you our whole lives, even when you weren't competing with me." "Competing? Tyler, you were always the star, the golden child." "And I worked myself to exhaustion maintaining that image," he admitted. "Do you have any idea how terrifying it is to be the one everyone expects to be perfect? To know that any failure would be magnified because Tyler never fails." I hadn't considered it from that perspective before. "That sounds exhausting." It was. It is. He pushed his food around his plate. "When you dropped out of college, part of me was jealous. You had the courage to walk away from expectations that weren't serving you. I never did." "You love being a doctor," I pointed out.
Ida.
"But I hate the politics, the pressure, the constant comparison to other physicians. Sometimes I wonder if I would have chosen differently if I'd been given a real choice." He met my gaze directly. "Watching you build something on your own terms made me question everything about my own path. It was easier to dismiss your choices than to examine mine." It was a surprisingly vulnerable admission from my brother, who had always presented himself as supremely confident.
"I'm sorry, Maggie-san."
"For the nickname you hate, for the dismissive comments, for not standing up for you with Mom and Dad. For all of it." Later that week, Rebecca invited me to her apartment in the city. Not the new one from our parents, but her current place, a stylish loft in a trendy neighborhood. Unlike Tyler, whose apology had been straightforward, Rebecca approached our relationship sideways. "Your outfit in that magazine's spread was amazing," she gushed, pouring us each a glass of expensive champagne. "Who's your stylist? You should let me introduce you to mine." It was such a Rebecca approach, focusing on appearances, trying to find common ground through the external rather than the internal. But as our conversation continued, unexpected moments of authenticity emerged. "Do you know why I started modeling?" she asked abruptly, after her second glass. I shook my head. "Because you're beautiful and photogenic?" She laughed, but it wasn't her usual melodic sound. "Because it was the one thing I could do that neither you nor Tyler could compete with. You were both so smart, always reading and discussing things I didn't understand. But being pretty, that was mine. Rebecca, you're not just pretty. You're intelligent, too." She waved dismissively. "Not like you and Tyler. I learned early that my value was in my appearance. I leaned into it because at least there I could excel." She looked at me searchingly. "Do you know what it's like to have your entire worth tied to something that will inevitably fade? Something you have almost no control over." I did know what it was like to have your value tied to external metrics rather than intrinsic worth, but I hadn't realized Rebecca felt the same insecurity I did, just from a different angle. "I was jealous when I saw that magazine," she admitted. "Not of your money or success, but of the way they wrote about you. Your intelligence, your vision, your impact. No one ever writes about me that way." It was a surprisingly honest admission from my sister, who had always seemed so confident in her place in the world. "It's not too late to build something different," I told her. "You have more to offer than your appearance." She looked skeptical but thoughtful. "Maybe. I don't know what that would even look like." Neither did I when I started. I reminded her. That's the point of building your own path. As winter turned to spring, my relationship with my family began to shift in subtle but significant ways. My father, always more comfortable with action than emotion, started sending me articles about the tech industry with notes like, "Thought this might interest you," or "Would love your perspective on this." My mother made efforts to learn about my business, asking questions that showed she was genuinely trying to understand. Tyler and I established a monthly video call that became a surprisingly important connection for both of us. Rebecca started taking business classes online, exploring interests beyond modeling for the first time. None of these changes erased the past or instantly healed old wounds. There were still awkward moments, misunderstandings, and occasional slides back into familiar patterns. But there was also a new foundation of honesty and mutual respect that hadn't existed before. The most profound changes, however, were within me. The recognition I had once desperately sought from my family no longer defined my sense of self-worth. I had proven to myself more than anyone that I could create something meaningful on my own terms. This internal shift manifested in my professional life as well. I began using my platform to highlight overlooked entrepreneurs, particularly women and minorities in tech who, like me, didn't fit conventional expectations of success. We established a mentorship program and a venture fund specifically for founders from underrepresented backgrounds. The company culture I built deliberately countered the hierarchical structure I had grown up with. At Nexus, every voice was valued, every perspective considered. We celebrated diverse forms of achievement, recognizing that innovation comes from many different types of intelligence and creativity. As the next Christmas approached, I received the expected invitation to the family gathering. This time, however, it came with a personal note from my mother. "We understand if you choose not to join us, but we're working on doing better, and we'd love to have you there. Either way, we're proud of you." It was a small thing, just a few handwritten sentences, but it represented a seismic shift in our family dynamic. For the first time, my choice was being respected, my boundaries acknowledged. My presence was requested, not assumed or obligated. After careful consideration, I decided to attend. Not from obligation or hope for validation, but from a place of strength and the belief that relationships, like people, can grow and evolve when given the chance. 1 year later, I found myself once again driving to my parents' house for Christmas. So much had changed since last December's dramatic revelation and exit. My company had continued to thrive, expanding into international markets and launching a foundation focused on digital literacy in underserved communities. Personally, I had finally found a balance between work and well-being, splitting my time between Seattle and a newly purchased beach house where I could disconnect and recharge. The Lawrence family Christmas looked different this year. The decorations were still impeccable, but there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere. For one thing, my parents had hired a photographer to capture candid moments rather than the usual formal portrait by the tree. More significantly, the seating at dinner was arranged in a circle rather than the hierarchical rectangle of previous years, with no head of the table position signifying greater importance. The gift exchange, once my father's carefully orchestrated performance, had been reimagined. Instead of my father distributing presents with lengthy speeches, we had adopted a new tradition where each person selected a gift for one family member, chosen by drawing names at Thanksgiving. The focus was on thoughtfulness rather than monetary value, with each giver sharing why they had selected their particular gift. My mother had drawn my name. When it was her turn, she seemed uncharacteristically nervous as she handed me a small, carefully wrapped package. "I struggled with what to give you," she admitted. "Nothing seemed adequate. But then I realized what you might appreciate most isn't something new, but something that acknowledges the past." Inside the box was a delicate silver locket. When I opened it, I found a tiny photograph of myself at about 10 years old, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a computer, my first, surrounded by books and looking completely absorbed in whatever I was creating. "I found this when I was going through old photo albums," my mother explained. "It struck me that this was you, truly you even then, creating, building, seeing possibilities that the rest of us couldn't see yet. I should have recognized and celebrated that spirit instead of trying to redirect it." It was perhaps the most meaningful gift she had ever given me, not for its monetary value, but because it represented her effort to see and acknowledge who I had always been. Tyler gifted Rebecca with resources for the small beauty channel she had started, focusing on age-positive skincare rather than the youth-obsessed content that dominated the industry. Rebecca gave our father a series of experiences they could share, cooking classes, wine tastings, activities that created connection rather than just adding to his collection of things. The changes in our family dynamic weren't perfect or complete. There were still moments of tension, old patterns that emerged unconsciously, assumptions that needed to be challenged. But there was also a newfound willingness to address these issues directly rather than sweeping them under the rug of polite conversation and performance. After dinner, I found myself sitting in the kitchen with Tyler while everyone else was in the living room playing a board game. He was unusually contemplative, staring into his whiskey glass. "Do you know what I realized this year?" he asked. "I've spent my entire adult life chasing external markers of success. The right schools, the right specialty, the right neighborhood. I've been so focused on checking boxes that I never stopped to ask if they were the right boxes for me."
Are they?
I asked. He shrugged. "Some yes, some no. I love medicine, but I'm tired of the politics. Amanda and I have been talking about moving to a smaller community where I could practice more holistically. Less prestige, but more meaning." "Mom and Dad would have a fit," I observed. He laughed. "Probably. But I think I'm finally ready to make decisions without worrying about their approval." He raised his glass in a small toast. "I had a good teacher in that department. Over the following year, I worked with a therapist to process the complex emotions surrounding my family relationships. It wasn't always easy to confront the ways in which childhood patterns had shaped my adult behaviors and expectations. There were sessions where I left feeling raw and exposed, having uncovered yet another layer of the unconscious belief that I needed to prove my worth through achievement. The interesting thing about family dynamics, my therapist observed during one particularly insightful session, is that they're systems where everyone plays a part. Your parents and siblings weren't villains, and you weren't just a passive victim. You all co-created patterns that served certain functions, even when they were painful. What function did being overlooked serve? I asked. It may have reinforced your drive to succeed independently. It might have protected you from the suffocating expectations your brother faced or the limiting focus on appearance your sister experienced. She leaned forward. The question isn't about assigning blame, but about recognizing patterns so you can make conscious choices about which to keep and which to change. This perspective helped me approach my family with more compassion, recognizing that each of us had been shaped by the same system in different ways. Tyler's perfectionism, Rebecca's focus on appearance, my parents' rigid definitions of success, all were responses to forces larger than any individual. Understanding this didn't erase the hurt of past exclusions, but it did help me release some of the resentment I had carried. I could acknowledge the pain while also recognizing that healing didn't require my family to perfectly understand or atone for every past slight. It required me to set boundaries, communicate honestly, and decide what kind of relationship I wanted moving forward. Beyond my immediate family, I had built a chosen family of friends and colleagues who saw and valued me for exactly who I was. Natalie, who had been with me since the early days of the company, was now both my COO and closest friend. My team at Nexus had become a community bound by shared values and vision. My neighborhood in Seattle included a diverse group of friends who gathered regularly for dinners, where everyone's contribution was equally welcomed. These relationships, built on mutual respect and genuine connection, served as a template for what healthy interaction could look like. They gave me the strength to engage with my family of origin without desperately seeking their validation. Professionally, the past year had reinforced my commitment to creating technology that connected rather than isolated people. Nexus expanded beyond productivity tools to develop platforms that facilitated meaningful collaboration and communication across distances and differences. Our mission evolved from simply making people more efficient to helping them work together in more human, sustainable ways. This alignment between personal values and professional purpose brought a deeper satisfaction than external success metrics ever could. The company's continued growth and profitability were welcome, but they were byproducts of our mission rather than the sole measure of success. As I looked around at my family this Christmas, imperfect, evolving, trying in their own ways to grow, I realized that the true empire I had built wasn't just my company. It was the internal foundation of self-worth that allowed me to engage with the world authentically, to create meaningful connections, and to define success on my own terms. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been painful revelations, difficult conversations, and moments of doubt. But standing in my truth had ultimately created the possibility for genuine connection with my family, with my colleagues, and most importantly, with myself. The overlooked middle child had become a woman who could neither be overlooked nor defined by others' expectations. The empire I revealed wasn't just financial or professional. It was the sovereignty I had claimed over my own life and the courage to live it authentically. As we gather around the table sharing stories and laughter this Christmas, I wonder about your own family dynamics. Have you ever felt overlooked or undervalued? How did you find your voice and stand in your truth? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more stories like this, and share with anyone who might need the reminder that their worth isn't determined by others' recognition. Thank you for being part of this journey with me, and I wish you holidays filled with authentic connection and the courage to be truly seen.